Right. Hello, I'm Denise Sullivan. I'm a nutrition and health education field specialist with the University of Missouri Extension. I'm based in the Urban West region, which is basically the Kansas City metro area. And today we're going to talk about the spice of life. Now, oftentimes we say, herbs and spices in one breath, but there is a difference. And so when we think about the differences between herbs and spices in general, the herbs are the leaves of plants, and spices would be the roots, buds, berries, seeds, or fruits of the plant. And spices are typically grown in tropical climates, so that pretty much takes out what we can grow here in the Midwest. But we can grow herbs here quite easily, and they're a very popular item for the backyard or for potted growing environments, a little deck box or something like that. So very easy to grow. So we'll talk a little bit about using, and then we'll spend a tiny bit of time on, growing herbs. So first question, might often wonder is why even use herbs? What's so special about them? Well, for one thing, they have great flavor. It's a great way to add flavor to a dish without extra sodium, like we might use in just good old salt and pepper. We get sodium along with the salt, but we can really expand the flavor options with herbs. There are some potential health benefits. We'll touch a little bit on those and explore that just a little bit more as we go along. And it really is easy to grow your own. It's convenient. It adds that convenience factor that if you can just go out and clip some fresh herbs that you've grown, it saves us money. Buying fresh herbs at the store can be kind of costly. So growing your own is certainly a way to have that one-time expense of plants or seeds and have something that can go all season long, or even multi seasons, as many of our herbs are perennials and will grow back season after season. And there are ways you can preserve those, by drying. Some can be frozen. Different methods of how you can preserve those herbs for use not only now but later on as well. So, I mentioned those health benefits of just adding flavor without extra calories, without extra sodium, extra sugar. So just the flavor power alone is wonderful. But then we have some things like potential sources of antioxidants, and some herbs and spice, or herbs in particular, have more antioxidant power than many fruits or vegetables. And we'll talk a little bit about those in detail as we kind of go through some of our more common herbs. If we look at ancient medicine and ancient folk remedy, a lot of ancient cultures utilized traditional herbal therapies, particularly in Eastern cultures. But the World Health Organization estimates that 80% of the world's population relies on some traditional therapies with botanical methods or botanical medicines. And even some of our modern drugs are derived from plants. So we can see that benefit just from that plant source. So looking at some of the evidence base that's happening, that we see some actual research studies being conducted on a variety of herbs. These are some of the findings that have been discovered. That sage may show some benefits in boosting brain health, in protecting brain cells, preserving memory, and some of that cognitive function. Rosemary can do some of the same as well, with reducing risks of stroke or Alzheimer's disease and some things that happen cognitively within the brain, and also relieving headaches as something that can occur with rosemary. Peppermint, easing the symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome or IBS, and some other gastrointestinal types of issues. So mints, peppermint in particular, being beneficial. Then we look at some spices that are getting some good research study. Cinnamon is showing to have some promise in blood sugar management. Ginger being very effective for relieving nausea, indigestion, again, some of those, kind of gastrointestinal issues. We think about ginger ale, a lot of us might reach for a ginger ale, but certainly even a ginger tea, fresh ginger tea, might help with that. Garlic and its association with improving heart health, uh, particularly showing impact on cholesterol and the different types of cholesterol as well as triglycerides. So both impacting those and having that improvement for heart health. Turmeric getting a lot of attention and study in terms of its anti-inflammatory properties. Ginger also is getting some attention with anti-inflammatory as well, but turmeric's kind of getting the bulk of the attention in seeing how that might work. So culinary uses of herbs, if you've never experimented, with herbs and spices, you might just not know where to start. What goes with what's a good flavor companion. And so we'll examine just a few of these and see some suggestions that might help you get started in incorporating more herbs into your diet. So basil is a very common one, a very, a favorite of a lot of people. There's actually, more than 60 different varieties of basil. And in China, it can be traced back to more than 3,000 years of having some medicinal uses, as well as in Egypt, using it as a botanical for embalming bodies in ancient Egypt. So a lot of history with the use of basil outside of culinary use, but in terms of culinary use, we'll see it often associated with Mediterranean or Asian cuisines, and it has a floral aroma, kind of anise or clove-like. If we rub those leaves. Mediterranean cooking, Italian cooking is what we commonly think of, but certainly Asian cuisines as well, as we think about the different varieties of basil. So we have the two main types, more of a sweet basil and then an Asian basil. Maybe you've seen Thai basil in some Asian cuisine. So when we think about pairing it with food, sweet basil, kind of that Mediterranean style, pairs nicely with tomatoes, but also just about any kind of meat or seafood. Asian basil has that more distinct flavor, a little bit more of that anise flavor, used often in stir fries or curries or some soups. So we might see different, a Thai basil garnish on like a pho soup that's very popular right now. For an Italian cuisine, we might see it layered as a caprese salad with layers of tomato slices and mozzarella and basil leaves, or even thinking about a miniature appetizer version of cherry tomatoes and the pearled mozzarella wrapped around a basil leaf that can be, skewered on a toothpick. Simple way to serve up a tasty appetizer. Basil also is that common ingredient in pesto, which we might have a pesto sauce for pasta or on sandwiches. So that's some common ways that you might see use basil used, but it really does kind of, basil and tomatoes is how a lot of Italian or Mediterranean cooking might start. Parsley, we oftentimes think about that as the garnish on the edge of the plate, and not think about it much of its flavoring components, but it does have kind of a light peppery flavor that really complements and blends well with other seasonings. So it is one of the most common herbs used in Western cooking. Two different varieties that we might see: the flat leaf and the curly leaf, or an Italian parsley. That's the one we commonly see as the garnish, that curly pasta. Um, but it too can be eaten. We don't need to just leave it sitting on the plate, because it's actually a good palate cleanser. And a lot of times you'll see in European dining that that's something that how they finish a course is they'll just kind of munch on that parsley to kind of cleanse their palate. Adding with citrus zest, either lemon or orange, and the parsley together is get a combination known as a gremolata, used a lot in Milanese cooking. And the thing about parsley is it does stand well to heat, particularly the flat leaf parsley is one of those that we might want to use for cooking as opposed to the curly parsley. That curly parsley, is often used in large quantities in a Middle Eastern salad called tabbouleh, that's a grain wheat kernel salad with tomatoes and cucumbers. Maybe you've had that somewhere. Cilantro looks a lot like flat leaf parsley. Very common in Latin and Asian cooking. This is the leaf of the coriander plant. It's also sometimes called Chinese parsley. So it has a kind of a very bright and refreshing flavor to most people. Some people will say that it kind of tastes like soap, and that is actually a genetic anomaly of the olfactory system, kind of that intersection point of your sense of taste and your sense of smell. And it is just something that genetically occurs in about 10% of people. So if you've ever encountered someone that says, "How can you stand the taste of that? It tastes like soap," then they probably have that genetic anomaly. But it is a very common addition to a fresh salsa, a lot of salads, soups. And it is best added at the end of cooking. It's one of those, it doesn't lend itself well for a long cooking process like some of our other herbs do. Just kind of that pop of freshness to utilize at the end of cooking, or just right prior to serving. Mint, very, very common, kind of has that cooling flavor, but there are more than 500 varieties of mint, peppermint, spearmint, chocolate mint even. I found a pineapple mint this year, the orange mint, apple mint. There's a lot of varieties, and they each kind of have their own flavor palette, but they do kind of have that just somewhat cooling kind of flavor. It's hard to think about cooling as a flavor, but if you compare the mints, I think you would pick up on that. It's often associated with Middle Eastern, North African cuisines. A lot of primary, ancient use as a medicine for digestion. And just thinking about utilizing that, we think about a cup of mint tea to just kind of calm our digestive system, or even as an addition to an iced tea. But it's a very simple thing to add to beverages, to a lot of our salads and sauces, even main dishes. Lamb and mint is a common combination with that, and that kind of cooling effect kind of makes a nice way to counteract some spicy curry mixtures. For instance, if we think about that North African cuisine and some curries. Rosemary, very versatile herb used in a lot of different cuisines. Ancient Greeks, thought it would help their thinking and thought, and boosting memory, and help, aiding against headaches. And they would put sprigs of rosemary in their hair while studying. There's some fun folklore with that, but that is one of the things that we do see some association with headaches. So not so much putting it in, in our hair, but by making a tea perhaps, or just some sort of a, just a tea or a beverage of some kind. It kind of has this pungent lemon pine flavor, kind of that intersection of kind of foresty with that citrus kind of pine. So it's a very unique flavor, kind of very strong flavor, and it's one of those that's really good for longer terms of cooking, as opposed to what we saw with cilantro needing to come in at the end. It lends itself nicely for a longer cooking. Not only in sauces, we might see this on top of some pizza, or maybe on a focaccia bread. That might even see some artwork displayed with other fruits and herbs, or vegetables and herbs. Thyme is another very common and versatile herb. Again, many different varieties: French thyme, English thyme, lemon thyme, but they all do kind of have that common, somewhat earthy flavor. With the lemon thyme variety, you get a little bit of that lemon citrus undertone to it. So you just start to thinking about what things pair well with others. Lemon thyme would pair really nicely with rosemary, but any of the thymes can pair up well with other herbs. And we'll see that in a lot of some of the blends. A poultry seasoning, for example, is usually a combination of rosemary and thyme and oregano. So we think about just how those combinations might come together. Very common in European, Caribbean cooking, and just is really nicely paired with most any kind of meat, but particularly well with poultry and fish. And then, if you're thinking about it in terms of soups or stocks, they can be very enhanced with some addition of thyme. It's one of those that the recipe doesn't call for it. A little bit can really enhance the flavor power. Sage, that's the one that we commonly think of at that Thanksgiving time. That's kind of what makes that traditional herb in stuffing. Comes from sage and gives us that Thanksgiving feel. Also sausages, like a breakfast sausage, very common with that. It's one of those common herbs used in that Northern Italian and French cooking, any kind of our European cooking. And this is one of sages, that one that has kind of the longest history, particularly in medicinal use. Prior to refrigeration, it was also used to help preserve meat, not only in the drying process, but also an antimicrobial process as well, as coupled with the drying process of meats. It is a very strong flavor, so we want to think about starting small and adding more, because particularly with dried, most of our herbs are more potent when they're dried, so it's always important to think about starting small and adding more after you've tasted, because we certainly can't take it out. But sage is one of those that is particularly strong. Chives, a member of the onion family, very similar to onions, but without a little bit milder flavor, without that bite. So we get a little bit more of that subtle flavor. Oftentimes we'll see it on top of a baked potato, or maybe on top of an egg dish, or with dips. But it is part of the onion family, and so it gives a little bit of that flavor, but just, not a lot of bite. Best added at the end of cooking. It doesn't do well during the cooking process. That's why we'll tend to see it as more of a garnish on something. And this is one of those that's definitely better fresh than it is dried. I've made the attempt to dry some chives, and you've got to use them very quickly, within a month, or you really lose the flavoring power of those. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Dill. This is one of those that we're probably very familiar with. Very a fresh, subtle flavor used a lot, again, European dishes, but it does pair nicely, with seafood. We'll a lot of times see that with fish and a dill sauce. And we'll use a lot of dill in maybe a cucumber salad or a potato salad or an egg salad. Some of those things that it really just enhances well with that. Uh, Cold soups, and when we think about summertime and cold soups, dill is oftentimes used in that as well. Some ancient Middle Age history, they actually thought it was, kind of a magic potion, and they would carry that around, in their pocket, in a little bag in their pocket as a protective factor. A little bit of folklore there. Don't know how accurate that is. Let's just stick to using dill for the flavor power. Oregano, another very common one. Again, Greek, Italian, Mexican cuisine. There are multiple varieties, again, of oregano. And so they have, well, they're all of the same family. They might have slightly different flavors. Mexican oregano in particular, you might see for, in a salsa, for instance. Greek oregano, we might see a little bit more, again, in pizzas or tomato dishes. Italian, it's the same way, again, pizzas, because that Greek and Italian kind of lends, the lines kind of cross there in the Mediterranean and where some of those foods originated for. But tomatoes definitely is a great companion to oregano. And again, like most of them, that flavor is more intense when it's dried. Interesting studies, by the USDA found that oregano has a lot more antioxidant power than some of those the fruits that we might think of as being antioxidant rich. 4 times as much as blueberries, and we think about blueberries being, a super food. Apples, even more than that, 42 times as much antioxidant activity as apples. So this is where we start to see those health benefits come in, of how we can incorporate more herbs and spices into our foods, into our culinary use, to get some of those health benefits, because antioxidants are showing, tremendous promise in chronic, preventing or treating chronic conditions like, heart disease in particular. So it's really easy to grow your own. I am not a horticulturalist, but I can certainly connect you to some of my horticultural colleagues or our master gardeners. But I'll just give you some hints that I have picked up in growing your own herbs and herbs. So easy to grow in container, and larger the container, the better, particularly for those perennial ones, because as they regenerate, the root base also kind of gets bigger as the plant grows. So think about that in terms of what size you're going to put things in. Most herbs do need full sun, well-drained soil, and some regular watering, of course. The drainage on the soil is particularly important to be mindful of when you're doing container gardening, and making sure that you do have good drainage. There are some that are a little bit more shade tolerant, things like parsley, cilantro, chives, and mint. But most of them, will do well in full sun. You can start them from seeds. You can buy young plants and go from there. I tend to take a little bit of a head start from people that grow things better than I do. So I will buy the plants and start from there. And then a lot of them, as you start seeing some of these grow, they can get very prolific very fast. So very easy to dry or to freeze, either in, just in water, or just setting up drying on a dehydrator, or just in just natural dehydration. Hanging in a bag is typically a lot of things that we might see for dehydration, is to bundle herbs in a rubber band, hang them in a bag, and then let them hang in a dry place. That's a whole nother presentation. When we think about using those herbs, like I said, on several of things, those dried herbs are more potent. And so we tend to think about a 3-to-1 ratio. A tablespoon of fresh herbs is going to equal the flavoring power of a teaspoon of dried herbs. So when you are using them fresh, be generous, because you will need a little bit more of those fresh herbs than you will the dried herbs. And as we cook with dried herbs and they go through some of that rehydration process, that's really when their flavor is released with that heat and moisture, when we're using dried herbs. And with any of the herbs, whether we're doing them ourselves or whether we have bought herbs at the store, think about the shelf life. They do lose their potency over time. So labeling your own herbs that you're drying is very important with the date. If you are buying herbs at the store, go ahead and mark the purchase date on the bottom. If you've got store purchased herbs in your cabinet that you can't remember the last time you've used them, they've probably lost their flavoring power. And if you don't get any kind of sense of aroma when rubbing the herbs between your fingers, you're not going to get any kind of flavor from that either. So that would be a time to replace them. Here is just a little with a couple pictures of ways that I have utilized for growing herbs. I've used to use just one large pot and kind of planted multiple things in that pot just on the corner of my deck. You can see we've got some chives there in the background. Let me see if I can get my pointer over here. We got some chives here in the background. And you can see they've started to seed. So these are little seedy things, they've kind of flowered, and those would drop and create more plants. And you don't want to do that really end of season. Those kind of got away from me, but chives, you would just snip them off and they'd continue to grow. We've got some basil here. Got some thyme here in the front corner, some parsley there in the center, oregano over here, and some rosemary here in the lower right-hand corner. That's how I grew my herbs for several years. Excuse me. This year, I went with a different strategy that I quickly found that wasn't going to be as great as I thought it was going to be. This was a series of stacking pots. They stagger stack. Originally, they were designed for strawberries, and I thought, well, gee, I bet I could do herbs in that and be a little bit more, get more herbs and still be space conscious. But not so much, because I quickly needed that. They, discovered some of them needed more room to grow up. And so I unstacked them, and they're just I've got them kind of nested in the corner of my deck. So my theory, not so great. I should have consulted one of our master gardeners before I tried that. So next year, hopefully those will contain strawberries. But it was a learning experience. Mint, I should have snagged a picture of my mint. I've got that growing in a totally separate location, also in a container, larger container, because mint, if you've ever grown it, it spreads and it can take over an area if you're not careful. So I've got my mint in a large container, and actually several varieties in there, and just growing together, but still they can't take over the entire front planter. So live and learn with some of those strategies. Like I said, if you are interested in knowing more about growing herbs, we can certainly hook you up with our master gardeners. I will be sharing a handout from the University of Arizona Extension that gives some great information on pairing